Tonight on Nation to Nation, Pam Palmer says whether it's Liberals or Conservatives that win the election, Indigenous issues likely won't have the same prominence they once did.
I am quite concerned that Indigenous issues certainly won't enjoy the priority focus that it did under the Trudeau government.
Veteran Anishinaabe journalist Duncan McHugh is heading up a new certificate in Indigenous journalism program that looks at offering courses in a different way.
So we're saying, listen, you can learn essential journalism skills at home.
Welcome to Nation to Nation. I'm Fraser Needham. After weeks of speculation, Canadian voters will head to the polls on April 28th in the 45th general election. The election comes at a time of high uncertainty. The lack of housing, affordability, and Donald Trump's threats against Canada, all major issues. Former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made reconciliation a major part of his mandate, but it remains to be seen how it will fit into the plans of new Liberal leader Mark Carney and Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. Metropolitan University of Toronto Professor Pam Palmer joins me today to talk about the election. Welcome back to Nation to Nation.
Thanks, lots going on.
There certainly is, yes, never a dull moment. So I guess I thought I would just ask you, the election just got underway. What are some of your initial thoughts, or is there anything that struck you right off the bat?
Yeah, I think all along, when you think in January, the Liberals were at their lowest polling, somewhere around 20%, and now they're at 40%. I mean, they were predicting various polls that Liberals had less than a 1% chance of becoming, having the majority of seats or becoming a majority. And now that is the prediction. So it's not too often in history you see such a massive swing. And so that, to me, that's very striking. The other thing that is also striking to me on the Conservative side is that many of their announcements post-Liberal seem to be similar, if not identical. And I don't know if that's a great strategy. And I guess my third real shocking impression is that there's predictions that the NDP could lose most, if not all, of their seats, that there's a chance they could be entirely wiped out. And I mean, that really says a lot for the NDP, who has, at various times been the official opposition.
Yeah, most from what I've seen, like you say, a lot of, the swing in the vote has actually been to the benefit of the Liberals from the NDP. The Conservatives have kind of held steady a bit, but that surge in the polls has been at the block, I guess, in the NDP. But now you talk about the similarity of sort of platforms so far from Liberals and Conservatives, and of course that includes this large tax cut that they both announced. The Conservative one, I think, would be work out to about $12 billion out of the Treasury, and the Liberals would be about $6 billion. Do you think this will affect Indigenous programming going down the road with this sort of tightening of finances that both parties are talking about?
Well, I think overall, given that the ultimate focus is on this tariff issue, how it's going to impact, prices for everyday Canadians, jobs, those kinds of national security issues, because there's such a disproportionate focus on that, and I understand that that's a crisis right now, I am quite concerned that Indigenous issues certainly won't enjoy the priority focus that it did under the Trudeau government, for example, where it was always, if not the focus in the original election campaign, to still a priority focus. I am concerned about that. Yet to see the actual campaign materials. So far, Carney went to the north, to the Arctic, to meet with the Inuit and Inuit organizations, and made an announcement about increased funding for things like power, housing repairs. So there's something there. It's obviously going to have to be a lot more substantive as as they roll out their campaign.
No, there's also, of course, a whole bunch of commitments that have already been made by the Liberals in terms of child welfare, things they want to, solve. A number of them missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. They really haven't met all their commitments there. Are you concerned that parties whoever forms government again, will move perhaps away from that with the money and also the complications of meeting the commitments?
So If the Liberals get in, and let's just say the projections are right and they get in and they're either the majority of seats or a majority government, I'm fairly confident that they will continue on with many of the things that are already in process. So there's nationwide consultations on lots of different legislation, changes to the Indian Act. There are already committees and advisory groups and plans to deal with things under a Murdered and Missing Truth and Reconciliation Commission, those kinds of things. So I suspect that those things that are already in process will continue. I'm fairly confident the funding levels will stay the same. If the Conservatives were to get in and we use past Conservatives as any kind of example or forecasting tool, plus things that Poilievre has said, I'm fairly confident that the money across the board would drop substantially like it did before, and that many of those things in the process, like the long-term reform negotiations, which have been settled in Ontario but not the rest of the country, would revert back to litigation. Hope that's not the case. I mean, those are really the only two parties that stand any chance of being elected. So it literally is night and day. It's not about little tweaks here and there. Someone's promising 100 million, someone's promising 150. It really is Poilievre's economic reconciliation, which he's defined as mines and pipelines and things like that, but nothing on any other issue.
Okay, so we kind of have gotten that the Conservatives for a number of years have talked about this economic reconciliation, and they've been pretty clear what that means to them. Liberals are also now talking about it. What do you think that means actually to them?
Yeah, so when, before the Liberal leadership selection, you saw Chrystia Freeland saying economic reconciliation. She was very much focusing on natural resources. That was a worry. I think we talked about that before because that was Pierre Poilievre's mantra. Now, economic reconciliation, it's really hard to predict until we see all of it. But if the Liberals at least stay the course of choosing not to litigate, but to settle all of these issues, continue to pay out on the cows and plows settlement, the First Nation water settlement, if they just continue across the board, that alone would be significant. Their biggest criticism, obviously, was ramming through Trans Mountain Pipeline, supporting Coastal GasLink Pipeline, not really countering Doug Ford here in Ontario, saying the Ring of Fire is going to be open for business. So the Liberals and Conservatives suffer from the same problem that way, not fully respecting our right to decide what happens on our territory. It's yet to be seen what Carney's position will be on those particular issues, but I suspect he will carry, the same way of continuing on with pipelines, regardless of what First Nations might have to say about it.
Fortunately, we'll have to end it there just for time purposes, but as always, a pleasure to talk to you, and thanks for your input.
Thank you.
Up next, we'll talk to Susan Tarosian of Elections Canada about what you need to do in order to participate in the federal election. Welcome back. As mentioned, an election campaign is underway and Canadian voters will go to the polls on April 28th. There are a number of ways to cast your ballot in this election, and Elections Canada is taking proactive measures to ensure voters have all the information they need. This includes a number of initiatives targeted specifically at Indigenous voters. Susan Tarosian of Elections Canada joins me in studio today to talk about some of them. So welcome to Nation to Nation.
Thanks, Fraser.
All right, so I guess we were talking about that a bit in the lead up. Obviously, we have a stable democracy, and it's, there's no real, sort of impediments to people voting if they want to. But why is it that Elections Canada feels it needs to sort of reach out so much and offer so much information to voters?
Yeah, so our job is to make sure voters do have all the information they have, and there are a variety of ways to vote. And some of them people are not as familiar with, so that's part of the reason why we do a lot of outreach. And there are certain audiences, Indigenous included, that perhaps aren't as familiar with the federal electoral process. They're probably more familiar with their own elections. And so we work really hard to try to reach people where they are.
Now, I know your organization did a 2-year review just looking sort of at some of these barriers to Indigenous voters. What are some of the things that you found?
A lot of just unfamiliarity with the process in particular. One of the things we learned as well is the importance of the verbal or the spoken language versus written language. We do a lot of work with written products on our website and so forth. So you'll see this time around we've got a few more radio ads and videos explaining the electoral process in Indigenous languages where we can find the talent. So I think we've got about 14 radio ads in Indigenous languages and 13 explainer videos on the process. Things like what happens when you go to the polls and how do you register to vote and those kinds of things.
Right. I noticed one interesting thing that the Chief Electoral Officer brought up during his press conference earlier in the week was this thing of offering more advanced voting options to Indigenous communities, this particularly remote ones. Did you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so one of the things, the other thing we learned in the review was around engagement and knowing people face to face, working with people, we're building those relationships. So in 2023, we started engaging at the returning officer level with all communities across Canada, Indigenous communities. We have struggled in the past in what we'd call remote and isolated communities, some very small communities, sometimes fly-in communities, to offer polling locations in their communities. And part of our model is we like to hire people from within the community as well, and that's a really important part of that work. So our returning officers started engaging on that in spring of 2023, just visited the communities where they could, established relationships, started talking about the voting service options, and planning that voting plan. So one of the challenges we've had, advance polls traditionally had to be offered for 4 days, consecutive days, for 12 hours a day. That's a long day, and it's a lot of resources in a small community, maybe of 50 or 100 people. And sometimes getting polling locations that are appropriate in a community that small is challenging. So what we have available now is we're able to leverage some flexibility in the Canada Elections Act, where we can offer and work with a community to say what works for you. Could be 1 day of advance polls for 5 hours. It could be 2 days, whatever the community wants in the community, in addition to election day polls. So that's the main change that we've made for this election and services.
Right. I understand that you've expanded the outreach to, it's something like 400 from 125, I think.
Yeah, in terms of based on all of that engagement that I spoke about with communities, we right now have planned services in 400 communities within the community for advance polls, compared to 125 last election. That is a plan. Returning officers right now that the election is called, are out contacting communities, reconfirming those service options, and connecting with communities that perhaps they weren't able to connect with earlier.
Right. Now, I know that a number of years ago, some identification changes were made in terms of casting ballots. So this has confused people at times because they didn't used to have to do that. Yeah. So what are some of the options that people should look at if they want to go vote in terms of ID they need?
Yes, and you're right. There are some challenges for some Indigenous electors. So the first option is if you have a driver's license with your current address, that's the easiest thing to use. Or another government photo ID with address, but often people have to resort to the second option, which is 2 pieces, one with your name, both with your name, and one with your address. Particularly in Indigenous communities, sometimes address is a challenge. So we do offer a letter of confirmation of address that can be provided by, say, a band office or an Inuit authority or a Métis, Alberta Métis Settlement Authority.
Right. Yeah, I know that's an issue that sometimes people living in a reserve or a remote community might not have that address or that utility bill, so they can actually go in, I guess, to their band office or Métis organization and ask them to just write it's not I guess the letter doesn't have to be too formal. I guess it has to be sort of have information.
So there is actually a template on our website.
Okay.
So elections.ca, and they can just fill in the person's name, and it's a pretty simple process. And then, of course, need to make sure that the returning officer is aware that these letters will be offered as well, but that's the authority that is doing that. So there is some connection with our returning officer as well.
Right. And one thing I forgot, there's always a lot of jobs with an election that people can get. And they're quite decent paying jobs and things in different communities. So if someone's interested in that, what should they do?
They can apply on our website. There is an application process. There's actually on our homepage, and there are a variety of positions, both in community positions and working within the returning the local offices across the country. There's 500 of them, but there are lots of great paying jobs, and we pay for training as well. So it's a good gig.
Okay, and also
build your resume too.
That's right. And the last thing is that people are often surprisingly seem they're not sure if they're eligible to vote, but there's only two basic things people need to vote, and that is Canadian citizen, 18 or over, and that's it, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they all don't assume you can't vote, assume that you can vote, and
Absolutely.
take the necessary steps, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, well, I really appreciate you dropping by our studio today to talk to us about this. It's very important, voting, and sometimes, and people just, there's a few reasons why they can't, but there's lots of different ways to do it, and I guess we encourage everyone to get out.
Yeah, and I would encourage people to just look at the voting options and plan the one that works for you. There is a vote by mail option, but that is, there are deadlines and service standards and all those things with Canada Post. So I think what you need to do is really think about if you do want to vote that way, apply now, and make sure you allow enough time to get your ballot back to Elections Canada by Elections Day.
Exactly. Okay, well, thanks again, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Up next, we'll talk to veteran Anishinaabe journalist Duncan McHugh about a new certificate program in Indigenous journalism at Carleton University. Welcome back. Duncan McHugh is an award-winning Anishinaabe journalist who has had more than a 25-year as a broadcaster with CBC. He also teaches at Carleton University and is a guiding force behind the new Certificate in Journalism in Indigenous Communities program. The 10-month program starts this September and will allow remote learning, a 2-week internship, and cultural and academic sports. Duncan McHugh joins me in studio today. Welcome to Nation Nation.
Good morning. Guiding force, that makes me sound like I'm powerful or something. I don't feel that way.
It was, I kind of was straight, we talked about it, but it's sort of it's kind of your idea, right? Your brainchild?
It is, yeah. I mean, when Carleton, I was working at CBC, as you said, I've been there for a really long time, and Carleton, I was there to do some guest lecturing, and the chair of the school, Alan Thompson, said to me, we would really like to see more Indigenous students at the journalism school. And every journalism school that I've been at across the country has had challenges attracting First Nations, Indigenous students, and I said, yeah, I would love to be part of bringing Indigenous students to the J schools as well. And he said, let's build something. Let's build something new, and that's what made me join Carleton.
Right. I mean, I just thought a bit. We were talking about it. We're in Saskatchewan, of course. There are programs out there, and they've been around. What I'm sure you studied them or had a look at them. What might be different, I guess, about the program you're starting here than some of these other ones?
I've taught at the program at First Nations University, and it's a fantastic program. There's no doubt, and it's serving Saskatchewan residents really well. But what's different about the Certificate in Journalism in Indigenous Communities that we are launching at Carleton is we're going to give our students an opportunity to study at home. We think that there are lots of barriers, there are lots of reasons that we're not seeing Indigenous students coming to journalism schools. It may be financial barriers, maybe cultural, they want to stay home close to language or the ceremony or hunting, whatever it may be, or they may not want to move to the big city. And all of the journalism schools, the major journalism schools, are located in big cities. So we're saying, listen, you can learn essential journalism skills at home. And so it's a one-year certificate that is going to offer them all the foundation and fundamentals of journalism, whether it's audio or TV, online, all that stuff. But we think we can deliver a lot of that online. So they'll be able to stay at home and take online courses. All of our instructors are going to be Indigenous journalists. And we just posted, by the way, if there are any Indigenous journalists watching right now, we just posted, we got 7 positions for Indigenous journalists to teach the courses. So that's, I think, the key thing that we're trying to reach out. It's not, we see the interest. I can see the applications coming in, and they're a fascinating group of people. They are people who are based in community, who, whether they're working in communications for their First Nation, whether they've got an interest in media and working in community groups, they want those skills but they just don't want to leave home. So that's what our certificate is designed to do, is to get them those essential skills. We'll also, it's hard learning online. We all know that from the pandemic now. So we're going to gather together in in-person sessions 3 times. We have 2 educational partners, Indigenous institutes here in Ontario, FNTI, First Nations Technical Institute, and Kenjigewin Tech. And our first gathering is going to be at Menadol-Minising, Manitoulin Island, at Kenjigewin Tech. The last gathering will be here in Ottawa at Carleton University. We haven't figured out where the audio course is going to be taught yet. But we've got all kinds of ways that we're trying to reach and design a program that meets Indigenous learners. Because I think that's the thing that's been missing. A lot of journalism schools say, yeah, we support truth and reconciliation, but then come and do it the way that we've been teaching journalism for all these years. And we're really geared toward making the best program that we can for Indigenous learners to learn in their home communities.
No, I know that then you're the perfect person to answer this question because it's newsrooms aren't representative still, as I can tell. Even they haven't. They've moved a little bit, but they're still largely not representative.
8 out of 10 newsrooms in this country don't have Indigenous journalists.
Exactly, and so I thought so. The current narrative going around you sometimes hear is, well, young Indigenous people, they can make a lot, if they're educated, they can make a lot more money in communications. They're choosing not to go into the field. I thought I might ask you that in terms of, is that really true? Or because you see this explosion in the arts and all these, like Indigenous people are doing all sorts of things that aren't money motivated, yet journalism, we're not getting the numbers.
Are you doing this for the money, Fraser? I didn't do it for the money. No one's going to get rich being a journalist, okay? I mean, let's be honest about that. We don't do it because we're going to get rich. And that, you got to say, and yes, you can make more money in communications if that's what drives you, but that's not what kept me as a journalist for 25 years, and I bet it's not what's motivating you. It is about a passion for storytelling. I'm getting shivers just thinking about all the stories that I had a chance and an opportunity to share with the whole country and beyond. Stories from the people that let me into their homes to share their most intimate stories and these, it's our time. We have had the mainstream media telling our stories for far too long in this country, and it's our time. We can take back the mics, and we do this now at APTN, where we can control the narrative and start telling news the way that it meets our community's needs, that it builds up our communities. That's what journalism is about, and more than ever, as we're seeing the local journalism outlets, starting to drop off, that's why we need to have Indigenous journalists setting up their own podcasts, working on banned newsletters. There's a world of opportunity now that didn't exist 25 years ago when I came into the business. But making money at it, that's not going to be easy. And that's why we've got a course on entrepreneurial journalism, because that's a question facing all journalists right now. How are you going to make a buck at this? But is it going to be something you love? Is it something that's going to change the world? Is it something that's going to make your community a stronger place, a more vibrant place, that's going to tell the truth about important truths in your community? You betcha. If you want that to happen, you can make that happen.
Fortunately, we're out of time, but thanks very much.
Thanks a lot for having me, Fraser.
That concludes this week's episode of Nation to Nation. If you missed any part of tonight's show, you can check out our podcast at aptnnews.ca/podcast. I'm Fraser Needham. Good night.